Cunnus T, how are ye? Welcome to the Candlelittales podcast. My name is Aaron and I am sitting down in me own labba. Well, me own room. No, I'm on my bed. It's the best place to have the sound insulating, and at the moment all my housemates have gone to bed and it's quiet in the gaff, so this is the best time to record at the wee hours of the morning. And I'm recording because we can't be in the Shabbos. I can't be in the Shabbos. Sorcha can be, but I can't be together. So we're going to do podcasts while we're in lockdown period a little bit differently at the moment. We are going to do a story followed by a special post-show podcast talking about the previous story. And Sorcha and I just released part 1 of Diarmuid and Grainne, and I'll be doing part 2 next week.
Except for the fact that I forgot to release this one a couple of weeks ago, and now it's sort of out of sequence. My bad, sorry about that.
Followed by another one of these post-show podcasts. So if you're a fan of this podcast and you like to support Irish artists, or just us, you can do by going to patreon.com/candlelittales. And of course, during this time of lockdown due to COVID-19, we're going to be trying to get as much extra content out as possible. So I just want to let you know that we've YouTube videos coming as much as possible from previous live shows that we've recorded and are putting up. To be fair, that's mainly Oisín who's doing that, but at the same time, we were there when we recorded them. So subscribe to our YouTube channel by all means. We're also getting more podcasts out there, and we encourage you to send us your requests. If you have any stories you want us to tell, we will do our best to get some out. And if you catch a live stream, we won't be doing loads of them, but we will be doing them every now and again on Instagram or Facebook or whatever the interweb allows us to do. I live in a precarious position where I don't have great Wi-Fi, so that isn't always possible for me. Apologies for all of you internet savvy human beings who are wondering where in the name of God I live. Never mind you, is what I say to you. Anyway, this story came because, well, it's a great story and we were planning getting along to it, but it was requested, so we moved it up the ladder and we decided to do this podcast in this time of isolation and captivity in our own homes. And it fits really nicely because it gave us a little memory of one of the first times we ever split up a story in a live show as a two-hander. Amazing. But it was the first time we did it with live music, and we did Diarmuid Grainne, and Sorcha took the Grainne perspective, I took the Diarmuid perspective, and it was a very funny show. I remember it well because I just kept on coming out with, really? Like, what? How are you doing this? And so on and so forth, because it was mind-boggling to everyone who was even listening how he kept on having to do stuff for this Grainne character who seemed like a bit of a wet blanket. But we will find out a lot more about Grainne's character, who I guess in this chat that we have doesn't seem as bland. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of a forewarning. We're going to flick over to the chat that Sorcha and I had about this story, about the first part of the story, and it went live on air on Instagram, and we were joined by people from all over the world, which is kind of cool. But I just want to explain that I had a bit of a sound issue on my home recording Zoom mic because we were doing it over the phone. Basically, I messed it up. We were recording on 2 different mics, and this is me making it up or making up for it. So apologies if my voice now sounds a bit echoey. It's coming through the phone essentially, and Sorcha luckily recorded her end very well. But we were joined from people from Australia and Brazil, Seville, Galicia, I believe. Someone from Clare up the banner, and as well someone I believe from the meadows in a forest in Bavaria, which really was class. And so if every now and again we read out a comment, that's because they were live comments at the time. Next week we'll be talking a bit more about the complex nature of the relationship that they have between them, and I guess we'll be catching up in a bit more chat, and we're diving into the middle of this conversation right now, so We've just essentially talked a bit about Diarmuid and his tricky situation, about the fact that he's left his friends and his family, and Gráinne keeps on putting geis on him to do everything that she desires and whatever else is going on. But don't worry, we'll find out that Gráinne is a bit more of a complex character than we give her credit for. And there is, after all, as Sorcha reminded me, a trope in mythology where women are made quite passive. I'm just about to reference a very good article called Sex Education or the Lack of with Diarmuid and Gráinne from Irish Imbus Books. Thank you for that article, and thank you for the inspiration, and thank you for continuing to listen to this podcast. To the point where that Sorcha was talking about, where the splash of water landed on her leg, the thing that was she remembered viscerally from school was the line that Diarmuid made a woman of her then, and that was that, and literally nothing, no explanation, and that was that.
Because these stories are not for children.
Yeah.
And we do a massive disservice to mythology when we, like, this is something that I have like a thing about, and Aaron knows my thing about this very well, which is that I kind of have, like, I have a little bit of a resistance to doing children's shows, even though it is something that we're often booked to do and we're often asked to do, because these stories are primarily not for children. They are thematically and symbolically and in terms of complexity, in terms of theme, in terms of like anything barring the most superficial surface reading of them is not for kids. Kids don't get half of it. And that's why I think people come up to us at shows and say like, oh, I remember this story, but I didn't know it had this in it. Or I didn't remember it fully. Yeah, because you heard it once as a kid and you didn't understand it because it's not for kids. And that's not to say that children shouldn't be exposed to the stories. These were stories that like everybody would listen to as a community, all together.
Well, I think you said like irrational things are not childish.
I actually did. That was a much better line.
I mean, like that's so all of the kind of notes and details and extra. Even just the fact that there are archetypes or big emotional journeys that these characters go on, they're not exactly childish journeys.
No, they're not.
Oftentimes they're magical, and the magic element of Fionnuala Salmon knowledge, or how Cullen got his name, and they're on the syllabus now. You know, they're in primary school history books,
it's not
to be taught. And I agree with that, and I think that's a fabulous thing to be exposed to as a kid. The magic element, when you're in the mythic kind of mentality and you believe magic is out there as a kid, I think it's very important to be exposed to a cultural narrative that reflects that. And I think the fall down is when you simplify it and you see it as kid stories, because that's what I think you're talking
about.
Exactly.
And that's a hangover of the kind of Western rationalist kind of mindset that we have all been raised in, which is that like rational is good, irrational is bad, and actually we can as humans entirely divorce ourselves from our own irrationality and be purely beings of logic. And we can't. And we shouldn't. And we, you know, I mean, you see it in science. You see it in, like, you know, as valuable and as incredible as the scientific method is, there are layers of bias in, you know, the framing of studies that is still going on, like the questions that are asked. So we cannot divorce ourselves from our own irrationality. And I think myth, because it comes from a pre-scientific tradition, celebrates that irrationality, and it gives us a kind of a way of working through those huge emotions. I want to see what people are saying back to me now, because a couple of comments have come through. That's just part of folklore and mythology being devalued in Western rational logic worlds. That's very true, dude. I think. Exactly, yeah. And then, as Raphael says, because I think we devalue them. That's the whole point. We make them childish, and people, even when we have gigs, we're like, oh, it's a storytelling gig. People come to it and go, I had no idea what to expect because it was storytelling.
And like, you know, we have this idea that storytelling is a childish thing, whereas we don't see movies, we don't see a lot of music as storytelling, even though the narratives in them can be very adult, can be very complex, and we love them all the more for it. And with their stories, we're designed for stories. The oldest, the most kind of primordial stories there are, the ones that speak to our heart, are the myths that are in our culture, and that's why we're so drawn to retelling them again and again and again, and bringing a little bit and try and get that kind of
and heart storytelling
away from.
I entirely agree. I just want to read out one more comment from Heart Storytelling, who says children would once have been exposed to them in their complex forms and grown up coming to understand them over time. Simplifying them is damaging. The mystery is vital. And I entirely agree with all of that. I think that's very, very true.
I'm not sure about that.
I like
performance for kids is something I love, and I started off my acting career working with Barnstorm and Louis Lovett, two fantastic theatre companies in Ireland who really take the art of performing for kids really, really seriously, and not seriously, but like value the art form. And I think if you can capture a kid's imagination in performance and a group of kids and bring them on a journey, there's the adults are easy, and the idea of doing that, they're kind of like kids' attention spans are a lot shorter. Their awareness, like once something gets very complex, they can tune out pretty easily. And probably modern day, with so much going on, their attention spans are smaller and smaller and smaller. But they're less forgiving. They'll just speak if they're confused. They'll just say, "What's that? Ooh, what are you on about?" Or "Oh, look," or they'll react if the story isn't fully consuming them. And I think a level of dialing them down is necessary, because you need the fun, you need the magic. Maybe more so, maybe it's just because I love playing as a kid to kids in a way, and the idea of heightening voices, facial, gestures,
and like
all of that,
I think
color of stuff
I agree with you that it is also a valuable thing. I also think that we've gotten like wildly sidetracked from Diarmuid and Gráinne, in part because we're having a fun discussion, but like we're also having a more general discussion. Catastrophia asks if we have heard about restoring or restoration. I have not, but that sounds fascinating, and I will look into it because it sounds
definitely
really cool.
Send us on any information you have about it. We'd love to hear about it.
Heart storytelling. I also actually really like. Heart storytelling is written. I tell legends to all ages together. I actually really like when I go to a storytelling somewhere like the Civic in Tala, and it's a mixed crowd, and you get people who are retired, and you get parents with kids, and you get a mix, because I find that actually you do have to pitch it differently to children. It's a different beast when it's a group of children. But when you have a mixed age group, it's not. No, when you have a mixed age group, and we've done a full-on telling of the Tone in the cafe in the Civic, with maybe half a dozen kids in the whole audience. And we didn't go into kid mode.
Sure.
And they listened. And when it's a mixed age group like that, like, it's really interesting, because when it's a mixed age group like that, the kids' attention span changes because the energy is different.
Yes, but I think I'm torn, because I've done that show with you, and it's really beautiful to see kids. And the first dance theatre show we did, we had loads of kids in the front row and adults in the back, and there was a big mix, and the kids sat quiet. A lot of the stuff went over their head, and as Heart Storytelling mentioned, they would grow into understanding it in later years, and they'd kind of reflect on it and go, "Oh, that's what that was." Yeah. Sure, but I think there's different art forms at play here, and I think I
agree. I think
kids stories is still an art form in itself, especially if it's a group of kids.
Yes.
And I don't think telling Diarmuid and Gráinne in the full level of what it is and what it was essentially given in text to a lot of Irish kids in the proper Catholic upbringing, as someone mentioned, is necessarily the right way to
No. And I don't think anyone's necessarily saying that. Like, children's entertainment is a valuable thing in itself. Exposing children to myth is a valuable thing in itself. But I think what we're saying, because I think I'm in the same side of storytelling in this, is not don't do it, but like the best way for kids to experience mythology fully is as part of a community, not siloed off as kids only.
Yeah.
But as part of a community with the adults, all sitting together and hearing different things from the same myth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something fell. Sorry. And like, I don't think I know. I also kind of want to wrap this up a little bit, because I feel like we're having a conversation about general storytelling. And this is also an argument that you and I have had many times and will continue to have. Like, I also know that you love performing for groups of children and you are extremely good at it. And it is something that, like, is a passion for you. So I'm also not trying to take that away from you.
That's okay. Both have values had storytelling. Surely in days gone by, there would not have been the segregation.
That's the word. Like, that's the word that I was thinking, that I was looking for, actually, is like the segregation of children. Because putting 30 kids into a room, you need to do a lot of work to get their attention. And anybody who's in education knows that. Yeah. But like, we wouldn't have done that in other cultures and other times. So moving on from... I agree
that we definitely shouldn't be doing the full, prescribed textbook Diarmuid and Gráinne for a class of kids, because they're all going to snore.
No, and nobody's arguing for that.
No, I'm just saying, like, in terms of that article that I read, and then to bring it back to Diarmuid and Gráinne now, in terms of
awesome.
So like the telling that we're going with at the moment is definitely not aimed at kids, but kids could certainly listen to it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much of our listenership listens to, or plays these stories for their kids, or how many kids are listening to it, because people have asked us, is it suitable for children? And we always cop out and go, it might be suitable for your kid. I don't know your kid.
And I guess my answer is always, and again, because of this segregation that we have and we've now developed in society, there is specific kids forms of entertainment, or entertainment for kids, and there's specifically adult entertainment, and they're not seen as interchangeable, even though everybody loves Pixar and everyone of all ages goes to see, or I bring my cousins to see whatever I can if Disney released a thing as an excuse to go to see it. I want to see it too. But like, and I still have a hard drive with loads of Disney movies that I'll watch if I'm feeling low. And like, as a big kid, you just want to watch something friendly and lovely. And I guess that's where we kind of fall down of like, look, we don't specifically make shows. These are these podcasts for kids. Yeah. We tell stories with music. Some kids will enjoy it. Our kids-friendly shows that are oftentimes more theatrical, and they're devised specifically with kids in mind. Yes, they're specifically done for kids, and we've
they're a different beast. So to come back to Gráinne.
Yeah.
I think somebody made a good comment earlier about how she's kind of like trying to survive. She's trying to survive in this world. She's
sure.
And the thing that she does, the inciting incident of this myth, is something that comes up over and over again in stories about women and in women's stories. And if you look at the kind of archetypal hero journey, the Joseph Campbell one, there's another one that a woman called Clarissa Estes did, which she calls the Queen journey, which is a different, not entirely separate, but it's a different type of story. And I remember being at the Bard Summer School one year when we looked at Diarmuid and Gráinne, and two of the people there, Ellen O'Malley Dunlop and Maureen, I can't remember Maureen's surname right now. Anyway, two of the Bard team took us through Diarmuid and Gráinne, through the Joseph Campbell a monomyth structure, and through the Clarissa Pinkola Estes Queen journey. And it was fascinating. But the start of the Queen's journey is the bargain without knowing. And that's the deal that Gráinne makes to marry Fionn McCool. She makes a bargain without knowing what she's getting into. And it's often a marriage. Like, it's often a marriage plot. It's the same. It is a similar story structure to Deirdre of the Sorrows, where she agrees. No, Deirdre doesn't actually agree, but where there's an agreement to marry an old king. And she doesn't know what that means, really. And then when she's confronted with the physical fact of, like, this is the fella that you're going to be spending your life with and spending your nights with.
Yeah.
There's a kind, like, Gráinne's reaction to Fionn McCool is revulsion. And I think that's actually, like, when it comes to talking about Gráinne and talking about what she does and what she should have done and what she shouldn't have done, she agreed to a binding contract without knowing what she was getting into. And, like, there's a certain amount of... There's probably quite a lot of pressure on her to agree, because her father is getting well sick of her turning down suitors and has made it clear to these guys that, like, it's not his fault if she turns you down. So, like, she's under some pressure externally. She's under some pressure internally because, you know, this is a story that girls are told, that you are not complete until you're married. This is a story we're still telling to girls. Girls particularly. We tell it to boys as well. We tell it to everybody, really. But, like, this idea that you are not fully human, you are not fully realised until you are in a romantic relationship. And, like, that's a story. So she's got internal pressure, she's got external pressure. This is a man that she cannot find a reason to refuse him. What she says to her father is, if you have no objections to him as a son-in-law, I have no objection to him as a husband. So she kind of asks her father to give her a reason to say no. And her father doesn't say he's too old for you because of the political situation maybe, or because he doesn't think he is. And when she sees this man, she's repulsed. And, like, when you're in that corner, when you're in a corner where you're like, I'm going to have to go to bed with this person. I'm going to have, like, this is a very visceral emotion that she's in.
No.
And then she sees the boy she's in love with.
So I think this is, like, going back to what you mentioned earlier about, by the way, hey, Ciara, and whoever has joined us. We're talking about Diarmuid and Grainne, our recent podcast, part 1. I think you mentioned earlier that it's a trope in old stories to make the female character very blah,
Passive.
very passive. That's
passive
the word.
and obedient. Good women are passive, quiet, and obedient in Western literature.
The modern reading of Diarmuid and Grainne is infuriating because we've grown up with strong women. And we're reading this really passive, bland, annoying. All she kind of does is give out for the first half, and she doesn't really. But you don't get any insight into her. You don't get any internal depictions of her. Like in your telling, you get that.
Yeah, but that's characteristic of myth, though. Like you don't like myth. Everything's externalized in myth. People don't. When you're reading the Odyssey, it's not like he was sad. It's he wept. And that's kind of characteristic of the story. You see it. It's acted out, and that's actually kind of, I think, one of the reasons why mythology is so psychologically powerful, because the struggles that we internalize, that we go through internally, are externalized, and they're acted out. And so Gráinne has this hideous dilemma. She asks Diarmuid to run away with her, and he says no, not a fucking chance, because he does know. He knows what he would be giving up. She makes the deal without knowing what she's giving up. He doesn't, and he resists. And I particularly love, and I actually wrote it up as one of the little visual posts that have been going out. I particularly love the interaction he has with her. When he tells her, he puts a counter geis on her and says that he will only come with her if she comes to him neither naked nor clothed, neither on foot nor on horseback, neither within nor without. And she does. Because there's something there about, there's something incredibly important there about liminality and threshold and stepping into the unknown and being between. And it's to me, I don't know what it says. I just know that I love it as an image.
Well, for me, it's kind of, he'll accept the geis if he knows that he's going with someone who is at least sharp of wit enough to come up with something like this.
I think it's deeper than wit. I think it's wisdom, and I think he is testing her wisdom. And I agree with you. I think he's.
Not just a pretty face, I guess, is what I mean. He's just like, okay, you're beautiful. There's no doubt. There's no denying that. But I'm not going to run away and sacrifice everything, even if I have to evoke doom, unless you've got something more there.
Yeah.
Inside you, and the fact that she's even able to come up and meet him with the challenge, the fact that she does and thinks it through and is able to be both in and out, clothed, unclothed, and not on horseback, not on foot, is just amazing. And like, he's like, all right, fuck it, you know what, you managed to do this impossible thing.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, like Rose May. Oh, are you the person who did the fucking picture?
Oh my god!
Oh my god!
It is. Oh, thank you. We didn't get to say that. Thank you so fucking much. That was amazing.
That was very, very, very cool. We were both very, very chuffed.
We're both chuffed. Thank you very much. Class. And yeah, I guess he does want someone who's a bit of crack. Yeah. And I'm glad you're loving the discussion. Hard storytelling, music to the ears. I want to tell you one thing that I found. I came across, again, in terms of like the arc and in this section, Sorcha, the splashing of the water was the way that Gráinne eventually brings Diarmuid into saying, look, I'm a woman, look at me as a woman, you're fucking ignoring me, I'm in love with you, and this is driving me insane, fuck you.
Yeah.
This sucks. This sucks, and like, it's fair enough. And as your telling says, they ran together from there on out. I found it amazing, and I had to run it by you because I was like, what the fuck?
Yes.
So I found this amazing stuff, and it's a Lady Gregory version. And again, the reason I have to pass it back to you and have a conversation with you is because I find it so archaic and so hard to get into the character's mind, especially the female's one, to understand what in the name of God is going on. So the story went that Diarmuid and Grainne are off, and they're in the cave, and a Fomorian warrior comes along, and he sees Grainne, and he sees Diarmuid with her, but not with her. This is before they've slept together. And this is while Diarmuid is still leaving the piece of meat out to Fionn at the fireside, because that's a sign that they haven't coupled yet or something.
It's a sign that she's pure. It's a virginity thing. It's gross.
It's gross. Anyway, the Fomorian warrior basically says to Diarmuid, oh, she's free game, is she? And Diarmuid's like, fuck, what? No. And the Fomorian warrior goes, yeah, give us a go at her, picks her up and drags her off to basically rape her. And Diarmuid cuts him in two and goes, no, fuck that, and defends her honor. And Grainne turns around and stabs him in the leg and walks off in a huff.
Yep.
And Diarmuid's like, what the flying fuck just happened? And then he goes out and they have this, like, he basically sits down fucking, devastated. He doesn't know what's going on because he's a man and I didn't know what was going on. And it was very confusing. Man, you stabbed me in the leg. What's going on? I saved you. What is wrong with you? He sits down and laments the fact that he misses his brothers. He misses his father, Fionn McCool, the foster father that he has, or a father figure. All of his friends, his livelihood, everything that he ever grew up with, that he ever loved, he's had to sacrifice because of this woman who has now stabbed him in the leg for saving her. And she sits down and basically tells him that, yeah, she had to leave her home, her everything, because of a bargain that she took up without really understanding it, and it was to marry some old guy, and she didn't want to, and she saw his old Sorcha, the love spot that he had, and she fell in love with him, and love is greater than anything that she could really put her mind to, and the two of them basically show each other that they aren't responsible for
And
what's going
I
on.
think that's kind of key for me in that scene. Like it's a kind of a boiling over of her frustration with him, because and like in that kind of discussion that they have, which I think you'll probably look at a little bit maybe next week in or when you're doing your telling, or I hope you do anyway. They both kind of have this like, it's your fault orientation, where he's like, you took me away from everything, and she's like, you made me fall in love with you, and now you won't look at me, and and I think, you know, that kind of unrequited love, I think again is something that's very, you know, very common for people to experience, and it's so easy for it to turn into rage, and it's so scary when it does. When somebody says, "You made me fall for you, and now you're not paying attention to me."
Yeah.
Like,
and it's so often the other sex flipped around, you know.
It can be both.
Man.
I remember having a conversation around the table after a Candlelittales gig where we all talked about our stalkers, because we all had one.
Yeah.
And like that's musicians, storytellers. It can happen to feckin' anybody. Absolutely. It happens to all of the women and all of the men. In our particular group, which was really interesting to have as a conversation. And like, it's
not just something that happens to women.
It happens to everybody. And like, you know, being on the kind of receiving end of that is quite scary, because you have this intensity of emotion coming at you, and you're like, I did not ask for this. But you're seeing it, I think, with Gráinne from the other side, where she's like, I didn't ask for it either. Yeah. This is something you did to me.
For the first time, whether it's the Fomorian warrior and her stabbing him in the leg, or and there's a beautiful line, she says, "Give me back my knife," and Diarmuid kind of says, take it out of the sheath that you put it in, and she looks at his leg and takes the knife out of his leg because he wouldn't touch it, because she was the last person to touch it, and obviously he's fallen in love with her, but he doesn't feel like he can act on it, because he still has this loyalty to Fionn. He still feels so torn eternally. He still has this awful conflict going on. And eventually, like, once he kind of accepts the fact that she's in love with him and she can't help it, and he's honestly in love with her and he can't help this situation, and they're both in it together now.
Yeah.
Rather than she doing this to him and he having to do this for her. Once they realise they're in it together and they're a team, and they realise that they have to do this and they have to take on the world together, like any great couple will essentially have to do, we just go, right, we have to fucking...
It's you and me against the world. It's you know? This is the only way we'll survive it. And I think, like, also the confrontation he has with Fionn McCool at the House of Seven Doors is also really key in that, because I think up to that point he's hoping for reconciliation, because I think, like, he knows Fionn and he loves Fionn, and he feels like, if I can just explain this to Fionn McCool and we can sit down together face to face and talk about it, it will be fine. And then he is kind of betrayed by Fionn. Like, he betrays Fionn, but I think there's a betrayal going in the other direction as well. Because he's always known Fionn as this big-hearted character who's able to, like, who's wise, who's... Sorry, Michael, for the PTSD. This character who's, like, wise and compassionate and forgiving. And, like, Fionn McCool forgave the man who killed his own father. And then when Diarmuid sees him, he's raging. He wants to kill Diarmuid. He doesn't want to listen. And I think that, like, I feel like that's experienced as a betrayal as well. Because his mentor won't talk to him.
Well, once he finally puts that to bed, he's like, right, now that I actually don't have something to go back to. Now I've done the deed, essentially. I might as well do the deed.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
you
I
know.
think like that's a really key shift in and that's kind of why we broke it at that point, because that's where the story shifts from Gráinne making Diarmuid do stuff to the two of them as a team, and it's them against the world. Michael also just wrote in, nonetheless, for me, this shows how mythologization of pain serves as its externalization and helps with coping, which, hard agree. I think that's
and hard
absolutely
storytelling
true.
as well. Said amazing to know how this has been part of human interaction for centuries or millennia, which is actually kind of mind-boggling, but so kind of humbling and true. Like heart, yearning, love, lust, longing. These are being human emotions for a very long time, you know. And,
Absolutely.
I think it's
Apologies
important
to
to know that.
Sorry for the shaky camera. Just.
I love that Sorcha just dropped that at the end. But we came to a very nice close there, thinking about how human emotions have been in myths and in the land and in history for such a long time, and whether it's loss or love, heartache or longing, joy, ecstasy or heartbreak or everything in between, it's been experienced by people everywhere and for centuries. So it's kind of humbling, as we said, and apologies for my dodgy audio there phoning in. We'll be sorting that out next week, no doubt, and we'll be picking up this story next week with part 2, and I'll be telling that, so tune in next week to catch that. We'll be following on with another post-show apocalypse podcast. Not apocalypse, sorry, that's uncalled for. So we'll be doing a few more of these. If you'd like to support the Patreon page, by all means, or if you'd like to share these stories, we encourage that too. This podcast was produced and edited by Ryan. Sorcha and I devised these stories in the way we tell them. The show notes will be going up as well with these podcasts. In terms of our sources, we put them up on Patreon as well, if you want to follow us there. But most of all, I hope you're keeping safe and sound. Hope you're getting enough of the good light half of the year right now, as well as the news and the information that's going on around. I hope you're taking care of yourself, your loved ones, and your own mental health. Bit of exercise, bit of fruit is always good. Washing your hands never hurt anybody, I suppose. I do hope you're keeping well, and those that you love are doing well as well. Lots of love, and as always, keep her lit. We'll catch you next time. You.